Hey, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're doing well. If you're new here, my name is Satya. I make videos about photography, filmmaking, and creative journey. We haven't done one of these in a while, have we? I think the last one was in February of last year. So I figured it's about time to put another film pickup video together with resources that I'd picked up in the last year, things that I found useful and happy to recommend. So we'll start with this category because some of the photo books and resources I'll be talking about later on, I was made aware of them by this podcast, Photowork. It's probably the single most important library of resource that I picked up this past year. I did listen to some other podcasts, but this one certainly stood out. And if you've not heard of it, or you have but are on the fence about it, I highly recommend that you check it out. It's a conversation between Sasha Wolf, the host, and the photographer guest for that week. They also have book designers and collectors as guests, but those are rare episodes. Sasha runs an agency that specializes in the placement of photographic art by just over a dozen artists that they represent. And the format of this podcast is pretty simple. The conversation begins with the photographer talking about their story of origin with photography, their struggles in the early years, and how some of their important work came about. I really enjoy how vulnerable and honest these artists are in sharing their stories, and I enjoy hearing them talk about especially how their formative projects came into existence. Yes, there's a book version, and I believe the book came first and the podcast followed. The book is a slightly different format where Sasha has a set of 12 questions that all 40 photographers have to answer, and questions like, do you associate your work with a particular genre of photography? Or what comes first for you, an idea for a project or individual photographs? Thought-provoking, key questions. And what I love about the conversations and books like these are that they make these monumental artists human without taking anything away from their work. And the questions and answers are a huge value add. And you might even ask these questions to yourself and might find, your answers useful, like to know more about your work. You know what I mean? I came to know about this book because I believe Kyle shared this in his Instagram stories a good while ago. The author, Seth Godin, talks about practicing your craft, whatever your creative pursuit may be, and that might be obvious given the title, but he also talks about the importance of shipping your work, because one of the purposes for your work, according to this book, is to complete its journey from you as a creative to whoever or whatever the status quo of the work was meant to change, and for it to be in your audience's hands, their walls, their music players, whatever medium they consume your art in. It's definitely an engaging read that indirectly and sometimes directly prompts you to ask inward-looking questions, and like any interesting book has some really good anecdotes as well to help the reader understand why trusting in yourself and the practice will help you in becoming a better creative professional who ships their work. Okay, this one's a fun book to own as a photographer, whether you shoot digital or film, and the book is edited by Jason Fulford and Gregory Halpern, who are both photographers themselves, and this is essentially a book of ideas, book of inspirations. There are lessons and some assignments from all kinds of contributors who are artists themselves, first and foremost. And I find it fun to go through the pages, find an assignment, and go do it on a whim. You might probably use it differently, but I think that's the beauty of this book. It is a book that can be used as you please. It can be a motivator, a teacher, a fun partner that brings engaging ideas to you, and anything else you want it to be. I heard about this book because Jason was interviewed by Sasha for the Photowork podcast, and I'm happy to have picked this up. It is well used already, and I recommend that you pick one up too. Okay, so to me, this book is a great example of being open to where the story takes you and to not rush it, and while sticking with it for as long as it takes until it forms a body of work or it reaches a natural conclusion, to be able to share it with your audience. Gillian Laub first went to cover this story in a small town in Georgia for a magazine article about segregated proms in 2002. But she realizes that the story needs more time and documentation, so she kept going back and photographed the town and the kids in the school as they grew up. She also made a documentary around the same time with the same name, and I think it came out after the school actually ended the segregated proms. The book came slightly before that. There's heartbreak, there's tenderness, there's hope, and sometimes there's anger too, at least for me. And Gillian captures it all so beautifully in the book, and I cannot recommend this enough. Jess Dugan is a self-employed artist focusing primarily on portraiture, and their work explores the issues of identity, gender and sexuality primarily, and this book in particular explores, in their own words, what it means to know oneself, what it means to live authentically, and what it means to connect with other people in an intimate way. It has plenty of strong portraiture, often quite intimate, and as a viewer you feel the vulnerability in the eyes of these people that Jess photographed. And they're masterful in setting up these images that feel personal. It's easy to forget that we're viewing this through a physical medium. I don't know how else to explain it. I mean, the way these photos were presented is they're beautifully interlaced with text from Jess, almost like poetry of their experience and anecdotes from their personal life. And even the sizes of these images are not all the same. Some portraits or some still life demand more space, and the book is designed to give that space, to somehow pull us in than what I thought was possible through a photo book, and to take notice of the subject matter and feel the emotions. So yeah, absolutely in love with this book, and Jess's work has given me something to aspire to in terms of removing the gap between the print and the viewer. This is an interesting book in that it's not from one photographer, but it's a collection of photographs from Black artists from all over the world. And it's all these photos are from a private collection of this one person, Dr. Kenneth Montague, who has his own personal collection called the Wedge Collection, and he gathers images from Black artists around the world. There is a Photowork podcast episode with Dr. Kenneth Montague, and it's a really good one where he talks about how this photographic collection came about, what was his experience as a kid living on the border of Canada and the US, and why he does what he does. And the book has text from plenty of other curators, photographers, art historians, and these texts add to what you see in these pages. The photographs are broadly classified into 3 sections, showcasing community, identity, and power. And what I most enjoyed about this book is neatly summarized by this text. Too often in the larger culture, we see images of Black people in attitudes of despair, pain, or brutal isolation. As We Rise gently refuses that. It's not that people are always in an attitude of celebration. No, that would be a reverse but corresponding falsehood, but rather that they are present as human beings, credible, fully engaged, in their world. I am the one to be generally suspicious of online courses, but this course came recommended by Brian Burks and also by Kyle, so I went and bought it, especially because I was starting a project on photographing people, and I was interested to learn about storytelling and working on long form projects, and so I wanted to hear what another photographer that I greatly admire, Alex Oath, had to say about photographic storytelling. We do get to see and hear Alec talk about his beginnings, his inspirations, talk through his projects, including Sleeping by the Mississippi, and how the ideas for these projects came about. These lessons informed me a couple of key things. One, it's important to have some boots on the ground. By this time, I'm sure you've heard me say it, because more ideas will show themselves and the path for your project or your career will appear clearer as you put in more work. For example, I was trying to define this boat project with a multitude of parameters at the beginning, all being conjured up from my imagination and what I thought would be interesting. And as a consequence, I was not shooting much for it because I was like, well, I don't have a proper idea, so why shoot something? But listening to Alec talk about his projects and how some of them came about made me realize that I need to be out there making photos, and the path for the project will appear. You know, it's almost like you're creating a path because you're moving, and the more you move, the more options will come your way, and it becomes easier to pick one of those options. And I certainly feel that way, having shot more for the project and having met and made friends with people living on boats. It's, you know, having boots on the ground is definitely key. And the second thing is fear about screwing things up, and actually screwing things up on the field is very much human. Nobody's above that. This was a crippling fear for me before starting the project. You know, what if I screw up something? More so than what would people think, I think it was more my own insecurity of what I would think of myself. But seeing this masterful photographer make mistakes and talk about it so freely was such a freeing experience to watch, and it reiterated the fact that your mistakes doesn't defy or define your ability to create important work. It's just part of the process. There you go. Second cliche for you. Also, this was a well-produced course, beautifully shot, and it's an easy one to immerse yourself into. But yeah, that's it for this week. I hope I haven't talked too much about any one thing, and that I've just said the right amount to pique your interest so you go and experience these resources for yourselves, because I'm sure you'll interact with it differently than I did. But yeah, the goal with this video is to introduce you to some of these resources that helped me over the past year to become better creative in general, and I hope that they'll do the same for you. As always, I'm extremely grateful for you. Thank you so much for giving me your time. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.